Good morning. I'm Reverend Devonta Cobb. Welcome to Sunday service from the Church of Scientology and Community Center of Dublin. Today I'll be speaking to you about the practices and beliefs of the church, what personal integrity really is, and what it means to you. Then we shall explore the game of man, as we discover there may be more freedom of life than we believe possible. So let us begin with the creed of the Church of Scientology. We of the church believe that all men of whatever race, color, or creed were created with equal rights, that all men have inalienable rights to their own religious practices and their performance, that all men have inalienable rights to their own lives, that all men have inalienable rights to their sanity, that all men have inalienable rights to their own defense, that all men have inalienable rights to conceive, choose, assist, or support their own organizations, churches, and governments, that all men have inalienable rights to think freely, to talk freely, to write freely, their own opinions, and to counter or utter or write upon the opinions of others, that all men have inalienable rights to the creation of their own kind, that the souls of men have the rights of men, that the study of the mind and the healing of mentally caused ills should not be alienated from religion or condoned in non-religious fields, and that no agency less than God has the power to suspend or set aside these rights, overtly or covertly. And we of the church believe that man is basically good, that he is seeking to survive, that his survival depends upon himself and upon his fellows in his attainment of brotherhood with the universe. And we of the church believe that the laws of God forbid man to destroy his own kind, to destroy or enslave another's soul, to destroy or reduce the survival of one's companions or one's group. And we of the church believe that the spirit can be saved, and that the spirit alone may save or heal the body. Now I'm going to read to you an article written by L. Ron Hubbard entitled Personal Integrity. What is true for you is what you have observed yourself. And when you lose that, you have lost everything. So what are some things that you could observe for yourself? Your name, your birthday, something that you really know. What is personal integrity? Personal integrity is knowing what you know. What you know is what you know. And to have the courage to know and say what you have observed. And that is integrity. There is no other integrity. Of course, we can talk about honor, truth, all these things, these esoteric terms. Esoteric meaning belonging to a very specific subject. So I'll give that again. Of course, we can talk about honor, truth, all these things, these esoteric terms. But I think they'd all be covered very well if we really observed what we observed, that we took care to observe what we were observing, and that we always observed to observe. And not necessarily maintaining a skeptical attitude, a critical attitude, or an open mind, but certainly maintaining sufficient personal integrity and sufficient personal belief and confidence in self and courage that we can observe what we observe and say what we have observed. Nothing in Dianetics and Scientology is true for you unless you have observed it, and it is true according to your observation. That is all. Now, you're going to hear me refer to something as a game quite often. So in Scientology, I'm going to give you what a game is. A game consists of 4 things. You have freedoms, barriers, purposes, and the power of choice. So, real life example you could equate this to, because it's Super Bowl Sunday, a football game. The purpose is to win the game. The barriers are the opponents. And the freedom is after victory, you have status that is attained, wealth that is attained, and you get lots of money. And the players on each side have the power of choice of whether or not they wish to play that game or not. So let's see what L. Ron Hubbard has to say about the game called man. People at large are not aware of a very interesting thing. They are not aware that anything can be done about anybody. The cop who gives you a ticket takes it in his normal stride that this is the way it is. The hospital attendants who've picked the remains out of the drunken driving wreck. The very best thought in various professions that should have to do with this are all agreed that there's nothing you can do about it. In other words, you have a cop down here, and he is on the juvenile delinquent unit, and he goes around and he arrests them, and he throws them in jail, and they get out of jail, and he throws them in jail, and he gets them out of jail, and says, after a while, they'll go to the big house, and they'll serve 2 years, and they'll come out, and we'll put them back in, and they'll come out, and we'll put them back in, and they'll come out. And that's the way that it all is. There's nothing that can be done about it. Anyway. And he says, what's the use of arresting these car thieves? What's the use of arresting them? You send them to jail, and they spend a year or so in jail, and they get out, and 24 hours later, they steal another car. They're crazy. There's nothing you can do about these people, and there's nothing you can do about the mind. And so, it's all hopeless. So why should I be nice to anybody? Why should I be decent to anybody? It's all just a sorry mess, and there's no string that you could pull out of it to start getting it unraveled. This is his state of mind. Only he doesn't even know that this is his state of mind, usually. Now, let's see how this barrier, all by itself, would influence a large society such as this. Here we have this remarkable thing, a computation. Now, a computation is action that is based on the course of thought that is had. So here we have a computation that the only way to bring about law and order, or to bring about control or direction or even betterment, is by applying more restraint, more law, more handcuffs. And that is the computation. It is not a willful computation, particularly. It is just the way that it's all done. The more force we apply to the criminal, to the juvenile delinquent, to the stupid, the more force we apply to the student who will not study, the more stupidity, the less study, the more juvenile delinquency, the more crime. In other words, we're just adding to it. Add, 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 add. Someplace along the line, some group has to take responsibility over the turning of this tide of course of thought. And in view of the fact that we are dealing with thought and not with masses, we can do it. In view of the fact that we are dealing with the spiritual side of life and not its swords, it can be done. And if we tried to do it with sword, it would still be doing the same thing that the society is doing. Control with handcuffs, jail cells, operations, electric shocks, duress, punishment, bad control, threats, fear. All of these things give us simply more deterioration. But we do not have to go along that line. We have found a singular fact. And that is, a small increase in freedom brings an increase in civilized behavior. Here's a great oddity, because society at large doesn't believe this. If you increase somebody's freedom, you would increase the amount of trouble in that society. That is the way they would think about it. And that happens to be a lie. By decreasing freedom, you increase trouble. By increasing freedom, you decrease trouble. That is the truth. Processing is another word for auditing, which is from the form of spiritual counseling very unique to Scientology. The auditor is from the Latin word audere. to hear, one who listens, asks sets of questions called processes, which help the individual look at his own existence and improve his ability to confront what he is and where he is. Now, somebody comes up once in a while and says, now, under processing, isn't it really true, now, confidentially, isn't it really true that you uninhibit somebody? Uninhibit somebody? He's assuming that everybody is inhibited. This isn't particularly true either. He's assuming a whole bunch of irrational things, that there are big black beasts that crouch just below the surface and thin veneer of society, that these beasts at any moment are liable to bounce free. His level of belief in his fellow man could not be written and sent through the mails. But he believes that the second we take off any restraint, that we would find ourselves confronting a bunch of poorly, rather behaved gorillas. At the very, very best. If you make somebody freer, they'll immediately jump for the trees and begin to swing by their tails. It is a completely unjustified conclusion, because we discovered that when a calm, permissive attitude is taken around a child who has been in a bad condition, who's just been upset, nervous, and so forth, that doesn't mean no control. People who have inherited from psychology the idea that the modern way to do with a child is just to leave them alone and let them run. No, that is not the way you raise children. You have to put a little bit of control on them and control them with certainty or they get sick. Remember that. We take this child who has been nervous and upset, and we give him a little bit of greater freedom, a little more participation in the game. We consult with the child as to whether or not it is all right to go to the movies. Sure enough, the child is liable to get kind of confused and a little unsettled just for a few days. He'll wonder, what on earth is going on? Something is wrong, see? They'll rattle around and then all of a sudden they'll say, you know, there's a little reality about this. They really do want my opinion as to whether or not to go to the movies. And all of a sudden, the kid settles down and becomes a civilized person. The way you make an uncivilized person is to deny him civilized conduct. If you assume his civilization and give him the freedom necessary to participate in the game called life, you guarantee his good behavior. How do you suppose we'll ever get rid of a criminal population if at all times the criminal, on being released from prison, is then shunned by society and never hired for anything? Where can he turn to but more criminality? Similarly, the backward child has to study longer, has to sit there longer, has to work harder, has to grind harder in order to get any place. Less freedom, less freedom, less freedom. They actually get more and more stupid. They are dumb. So the thing to do is really pour the education on them. Give them examinations. Tell them that if they don't get an A in arithmetic, Pop and Mom are going to feed them to the garbage man. In other words, threat and duress. Nobody ever assumes this child can know or do anything. And this attitude continues on throughout his life. Very few people assume anything good about him at all. Nobody assumes that he can do anything. And as long as this is the attitude of society, look at the enormous danger poised before that individual's very eyes. Look at the danger. The danger is, if I really fit myself into this society, a society of people who believe that I am stupid and incompetent, that I have to be taught everything 8 times, if I really fit myself in and cooperate with the prevailing attitude, I would be the deadest duck I'd ever met. So I dare not let myself get into a position where I am in cooperation with my fellows. If you had every player on a football field afraid to touch the ball, and every player bound and determined that the others were not going to touch the ball either, you would sure have some football game. Wouldn't you? You would have 22 men out there and a ball sitting in the middle of the field. And these guys would be arguing with each other. Well, you're not really trustworthy to touch that ball. I don't know whether I want you on my team or not because blah. It would be a great game, wouldn't it? Did it ever strike you that life at large could be as much fun on its broadest scale and the fullest definition as a nice football game? That there could be as much enthusiasm to even the small, mundane, ordinary things that might possibly be to playing a very exhilarating game. It's almost far-fetched, isn't it? To think that talking to one's fellow man and engaging in cashing a check and doing this and doing that could be a continuous exhilarating experience, even though it wasn't big, huge, and dramatic. It isn't the amount of motion or action. It isn't the stake. It isn't the grandeur or the trappings that make a game. It is the willingness of those about us to play a game that makes a game. And when we lose sight of that, we lose the game. And life becomes a serious, onerous, arduous, dog-eat-dog endeavor. And the degree of people are unwilling to play the game in this society is measured by the number of handcuffs, the number of jails, the number of hospitals and institutions, and the number of laws. Now, it takes a few laws to make a game. You always have to have some barriers and restrictions to have a game. But when you get too many, you get no game, except this game. The game of making more laws that will make more laws necessary. That is a game for attorneys and not for citizens. Whenever we look then and find people miserable or unhappy, or believing that they could not possibly survive or have a good time, all we are looking at in this community, which is composed in the majority of people who cannot play a game and will not let other people play one. A good civilization would be that civilization in which the individuals of which it was composed of could play a game and knew they could play a game, and were playing a game called culture. And if that attitude could exist, you would immediately, of course, have human rights, respect for one's fellows, and these things would fall in line. But let me assure you of this. If everybody in such a society were to believe that nothing could be done about it at all, then you would have guarantee that the situation would deteriorate. So that is our primary barrier. That is the primary thing we have to overcome with Scientology. Something can be done about it. Not what can be done about it. That there is too up high. It is possible for something to occur that will put a person in better relations with his life and his fellows. The society does not know that, has no inkling of it. Just because you know a lot of things puts a responsibility on you. But just because you know Scientology is no reason or license to stop living. You should be able to live much more fully, but feel very free to use or not use exactly what you know. And use it as you think it ought to be used. To create the effect you want to create, or just to create a random effect. That is a wide license, isn't it? The material is yours. Go ahead and take it. Now, you can discover more about life by reading L. Ron Hubbard's book, Scientology, A New Slant on Life. Here you'll find more about life as a game, the 2 rules for happy living, and many other discoveries by L. Ron Hubbard that you can use to lead a better life right now. Now, we'll be going over a few announcements. This Tuesday, we'll be having Vincent Kelly with his ever popular webinar. This week's topic is on confidence, and that is on Tuesday at 8 p.m. I look forward to seeing you there. Now, we're going to end Sunday service with the reading of the Scientology prayer for total freedom. May the author of the universe enable all men to reach an understanding of their spiritual nature. May awareness and understanding of life expand so that all may come to know the author of the universe. And may others also reach this understanding which brings total freedom. At this time, we think of those whose liberty is threatened, of those who have suffered imprisonment for their beliefs, of those who are enslaved or martyred, and for all those who are trapped, brutalized, or attacked. We pray that human rights will be preserved so that all people may believe and worship freely, so that freedom will once again be seen in our land. Freedom from war and poverty and want. Freedom to be, freedom to do, and freedom to have. Freedom to use and understand man's potential, a potential that is God-given and God-like. And freedom to achieve that understanding and awareness that is total freedom. May God let it be so. Thank you for coming to Sunday service. I look forward to seeing you next week.
A blue sky and miles of sea stretching to the horizon.